Welcome to the fourth part of my 1860s transformation dress series. Today I'm going to show how I made the replica of this 1862 petticoat and how you can make a petticoat for almost any hoop skirt. The petticoat that I wanted to replicate consists of three main parts: waistband, skirt and flounce. To make this petticoat for yourself, start by measuring from the hoop skirt waistband to the second hoop. Let's call this skirt length. Measure the circumference of the second hoop, or if you use my hoop skirt pattern, you can get this value from the instruction. And it's going to become the skirt width. Add 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters to the skirt length for the seam allowance, and 7 inches or 18 centimeters or more for the ease to the skirt width. Now let's move to the flounce. Measure from second hoop down to the point you want your petticoat to go, and measure the bottom hoop. These measurements are going to become your flounce length and width. Add 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters to the flounce length for the seam allowance, and as much as you want for the hem. Add 14 inches or 35 centimeters or more for the ease to the flounce width. If you want to add tucks to the flounce, you should change your flounce length accordingly. For example, if you want to make 1-inch tucks, you should add 2 inches of length for each of them. These long rectangles you made for the skirt flounce are probably not going to fit on standard width fabric, so you need to split it into 2 or possibly 3 panels. Write these new measurements down and let's put them aside for now. In case you don't want to go deep in math, I created a pattern for both simple and tucked petticoat in 3 sizes for each one of my hoop skirts. They show the fabric layered for different fabric width and also tucks and hem marks, so you don't have to figure it out yourself. Now that you're ready to make a petticoat, let's start with a waistband. Cut a rectangle that's 4 inches or 10 centimeters wide. For length, take your waist measurement and add 3 inches or 8 centimeters to it. Fold it in half lengthwise, wrong side out, and press. Sew along the raw edge using the 5/8 of an inch or 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. Leave one of the ends open. Trim both seams as much as you can, going as close to the seam as possible. Grab the open end of the waistband and push a hard straw through the tube until it meets the sewn end. Get something with a blunt end and start pushing the sewn end inside the straw. Push until it goes out through the other side of the straw, then press really well. Now fold the edges of the opening inside and close it using a whip stitch or a ladder stitch. Mark the half and quarter points on the waistband. They are going to be your back and side marks. Now it's time to start working on the main piece. Start with cutting, or in my case ripping, panels for your future petticoat. Make marks on the selvage using the measurements you made and cut a bit past your selvage. Now grasp each side and begin to pull apart, tearing the fabric. I think it's the easiest method to get a perfect rectangle. Repeat it for the other skirt panels. First, let's work on the skirt. You need to sew the short sides on both panels together to create a wide loop. Here I'm using flat fell seams, so the raw edges are hidden inside, but you can use any other seam you want. Here I won't go into details on how to sew flat fell seams, but you can watch my previous video on how to make a hoop skirt to learn more. Now you need to make an opening at the back. Mark the center back point by folding the side seams together and then draw the line for the opening that's 8 inches or 20 centimeters long. Then carefully cut the trace line open. To finish the edges of the opening, use a bias tape. Open out one side of the tape and with right sides together, pin the bias tape to the opening, matching the raw edges, and sew. After sewing, press the bias tape away from the opening. Then wrap the bias tape around the edge of the seam allowance to the wrong side and press again. Now you can either finish it with stitch in the ditch from the right side or with whip stitches from the wrong side, like I'm doing here. To create a cartridge pleating at the top, first you'll need to fold 1 inch or 2 centimeters from the top to the wrong side all the way around and press. Now I'm going to show you my lazy method for marking stitches for the pleating. Remove the bobbin from the sewing machine. You'll need a double needle size 6. Insert it, but don't thread it. Use a bigger stitch length and just go all the way around the top of your skirt. Then you'll get these 2 even rows of holes that are the same distance from each other. Now you can just sew pleating threads at each mark or at every other mark, like I'm doing here. It's best to use a strong, heavy thread for this. Repeat it for the other row and then gather both of them at the same time. But if you don't have a double needle, or you just want to make things the proper way, then you should check a great article about it in the description. Now it's time to sew the top of the petticoat to the waistband. Pin the center front to the center of the waistband, then pin the side seams to the side marks on the waistband, and finally pin the center back to the edges of the waistband. Make sure that your pleats are evenly spaced and pin everything in place. Then start attaching pleats with whip stitches. Again, it's better to use a heavy thread for this. After you're done, move the pleating threads to the wrong side and tie them together. Now let's finish the waistband. Mark the buttonhole placement and cut it open. Then make blanket stitches around the hole to create a buttonhole. Now it's time for a fitting, to sew the button in the correct position. Mark the dot through the buttonhole and sew the button in place. This next part would only be necessary if you're making a petticoat for a hoop skirt that's longer in the back. If the hoop skirt you're using is round, you can skip this step. Put the petticoat on the dress form with the hoop skirt underneath. As you can see, it's a lot longer in the front, and that's what we need to fix. I use the second hoop as a guide to mark the line that will help me to make the skirt even. After marking the line, take the petticoat of the dress form and cut the extra fabric. And then it should look kind of like a high-low skirt. The last step for the skirt, before we move on to the flounce, is to mark the halves and quarters on each panel. Now that the top of the petticoat is done, let's work on the bottom. Depending on your fabric width, you may have 2 or 3 panels that you need to sew together. Repeat the same steps that you used to make the top part to get a long loop of fabric. Then hem the bottom of the skirt by folding over 1/4 of an inch or 5 mm and sewing in place. If you chose to make a tucked petticoat, now would be a good time to mark the tucks on the right side of the skirt. Start marking from the hem and go all the way up to the top. If you're making a petticoat without tucks, just mark the line for the hem using the measurement that you chose. Now that you mark the center point of the tucks, you need to fold it so the marked line is on the folded edge, and then sew using 1 inch or 2.5 cm seam allowance. Use your sewing machine stitch guide to create a straight stitch. If you're using my pattern, start with the second marked line. The first would be used for the double hem. Sew all the way around, and in the end you will get the tuck That's exactly 1 inch wide. Repeat it for the other tucks. Now you'll have to do a lot of ironing. First, fold the bottom hem to the wrong side, using the first line that you marked, and press. Then turn the skirt right side out and press the tucks away from the top. To finish the hem, you can use any stitch that won't show on the right side. Here I decided to use a catch stitch, that's also called a herringbone stitch. It's really easy to do. You just make tiny stitches, inserting the needle from right to left to connect the hem to the skirt. On the right side of the skirt, those tiny stitches should be almost invisible. Repeat this until you have gone all the way around the hem. Now that the flounce is done, you need to stitch it to the top. First, mark the halves and quarters on the raw edge of the flounce, the same way you did for the skirt. Gather this edge using 2 gathering threads. Set your sewing machine to a long straight stitch and stitch 2 lines. Then grab both bobbin threads on one side and pull to slide the fabric along the threads. Pin skirt and flounce parts right sides together, matching half marks, quarter marks and side seams. Stitch both pieces together between 2 gathering threads and remove them afterwards. Finish the raw edges with blanket stitch to prevent them from fraying and press the seam allowance to the top. And that's about all. Using this tutorial, you can create a petticoat for almost any hoop skirt. I would love to see what you make. So tag me or send me a message on Instagram if you want to share it with me. But again, if you don't want to be bothered with math, you can find the patterns with all of the measurements in my Etsy shop. In the next video, I'm finally going to start working on something that's not an undergarment. I will show you how I made a skirt and an overskirt. But for now, I think that's all for today. Thank you for staying with me till the very end, and I'll see you when I see you.